All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning, How to Handle Disappointing Grades, Ways to Uncover the Reasons Behind Your Child's School Performance, and How to Help. My name is Mary Beth Harrison Cunningham. I'm the manager here at the Family Resource Center, and we would like to welcome you this morning for this amazing presentation. Ann Dolan is a former Fairfax County Public Schools teacher and author who founded Educational Connections in 1998. The company, which is celebrating the 26th anniversary, specializes in helping students build executive function skills and study habits to perform better in school and ultimately in college. Based on her nearly 30 years of experience working with students, Anne's developed practical strategies that she shares to help kids succeed and make the most of their academic journey. Anne and her team of more than 120 tutors, executive function coaches, college consultants, and parent coaches provide virtual support to families with kindergarten to college students throughout the country. Anne is the past president of CHAD of Northern Virginia and is an advocate for students with ADHD and other learning differences. She is also the author of the award-winning book, Homework Made Simple, Tips, Tools, and Solutions for Stress-Free Homework, and her latest book, Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. And we are so excited to have Ann Dolan here with us. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. It is really great to be here with all of you this morning. So as Mary Beth mentioned, we're talking about how to handle disappointing grades. And when we see a grade on a report card or when we log into the portal and it's not what we think it should be, there's lots of thoughts that enter our minds like, how should I talk to my child about this? What exactly should I say without creating this huge fight? Um, should I punish for bad grades? Or maybe I should just take the opposite approach. And if I see a good grade, I'll just reward for that. What do I do? And I tell you that this issue is really complicated. It's kind of confusing because many of the students we work with, although they're struggling, actually are pretty capable of doing the work. But for one reason or another, they're underperforming. Some parents say, my child is smart, but scattered, or she's really bright, but she's so disorganized. And when we see these issues crop up and the result is a low grade, it really is concerning to us because we know that our kids have potential, but they're caught in something called a doom loop. So here's what happens. The student gets a bad grade. They get criticism from others, maybe a parent, perhaps a teacher, or maybe their sports coach. That results in lowered confidence. And when you're not feeling too good about yourself, you really put in even less effort to the subject. And then the whole cycle starts all over again, another bad grade. So every day, parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And when we see this going on, when a parent talks to us about their student who is underperforming, and it might not be a terrible grade like a D or an F, but it might be a C. And these days, a C tells us that the student probably doesn't have mastery of the subject. We want to figure out why, because there is no one-size-fits-all solution to these issues. So our first task at hand when we work with kids and talk to parents is really to kind of peel back the onion in a sense to determine what's going on. Why is this bad grade occurring in the first place? So let's start there and talk about some common causes behind poor grades. All right, here's the first one. The student doesn't understand the subject material, the content. Maybe they have weak executive function skills. They have trouble with goal-directed behavior. They know what they want to do, but they can't focus well enough and finish the task at hand. Sometimes it's a combination of both. It's not really having great understanding of the subject material and weak executive function skills for a perfect storm. Sometimes there's also a mental health issue at play. So you don't have to put this in the chat or anything like that, but I'm just curious, where does your child fall? As you think about this, where do you see your child? So let's start out with the last one I mentioned, a mental health concern. Everybody feels stressed at one point or another. Stress is okay, it's situational. However, sometimes that can bleed into bigger issues like feeling anxious over time. Maybe the student's diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Perhaps they're depressed. So if that's the cause, often we see kids lack motivation. They can't really muster up the energy to do well in school. And although that's, treating these mental health issues isn't what we do, I'm happy to give you a local referral. Absolutely talk to your pediatrician if you have a concern. And the folks at the Parent Resource Center can also point you in the right direction. So that aside, let's talk about the academics and start out with that first one I mentioned, kids that do not understand the content. This is typical of students. And, what often starts out as like, I don't quite get it, morphs into, oh my gosh, I really don't get it. And so they often go to class and it looks like they're paying attention. So they'll sit in class, they're not a behavior problem. They're kind of looking around, nodding to the teacher, looking at the whiteboard, but they're kind of like Swiss cheese. They're in and out of focus. So they have these holes like Swiss cheese, these gaps in their learning where they have some skills, but not other skills. And then when they go home to do the homework, they're not quite sure how to do it. So they often just slap something on the paper to make it look like they've tried something, or they don't even do it at all because they are Swiss cheese kids. They've got holes in what they understand. Now, we often see this in cumulative subjects where one skill builds upon another. Math. Think a math-based science, especially as kids get older, like chemistry or physics, and foreign languages. These are all subjects that require a foundational level of skills, and everything builds upon that. We also see it in subjects with a heavy emphasis on something we call working memory. Working memory isn't short-term, it's not long-term. It's your brain's ability to hold things while you manipulate the information. This happens a lot in written language and math. So if your child has ADHD, you might see this pattern in those two areas as well. And when kids have these issues of not quite understanding the content and feeling kind of down, two pitfalls start to occur when they have to study for a test or a quiz. Two things happen. One, they underestimate the time they need because they don't want to do it. So they think, I'll just study for 10 minutes. That's good enough. That's all I'm going to do. They don't realize that that 10 minutes isn't going to get them that far. Here's the other thing that happens. They don't have effective study skills. And what they often do, and actually this isn't just typical of these students, but many, many kids, in fact, one survey I read said that 85% of students self-reported they study inefficiently by rereading their notes. So they take their notes and they just read them over and over and they announce they've studied. This is not an effective study skill. In fact, this is the worst way to study because it's super passive. But when something's hard for you, you take the path of least resistance. So one of our goals when working with kids is to really understand, again, peeling back the layers. Is this a content issue? And if it is, I'll talk about how we fill in those gaps and what's important to know about kids in this area. But they also have to learn some really basic study skills. There's been tons of research on how kids learn and how they do well on tests and get good grades. It's not by rereading. Here's what it looks like. There are two ways. The first one is called self-testing. So let's say the student has their notes from class, or maybe they don't want to take notes, but they have a study guide that the teacher gave them and they filled it in with the right answers. A better way of studying, instead of just rereading it, is to cover up the answer and ask yourself the question and see if you know the answer without looking. And then you test yourself. Do you know it? If you do, you check. If you don't know it, you put a little X, and if you do, you put a check. So you go through each one and you ask yourselves those questions without looking at the answer. You reveal it and see if you're right. Then the next day, you go back and you study the questions you do not know. And you keep doing this until you know them. This is called self-testing. So that's using the teacher's study guide. You can also do it by creating your own. We teach kids how to do this, especially in subjects like math. And another way you can self-test is by using the games in Quizlet, which a lot of kids use to practice. So that's one way, is self-testing, right? Okay, here's the other way. It's called distributed practice. Sometimes people will call this spaced practice, but it's the same thing. So here's the idea. That student that wants to take the path of least resistance and study for 10 minutes on Thursday for a test on Friday, it's probably not enough. But if they're really hesitant about spending long amounts of time, it's okay. They can still do 10 minutes on Thursday, but they should also do 10 minutes Wednesday and 10 minutes Tuesday. And we'll ask kids that we work with, why do you think this idea of just doing a little bit over a few days is better than just one time? And they'll say, well, because you're practicing it more. And this is true. But here's the other thing. You're sleeping on it. And when you learn something and you sleep on it, then your brain is really rehashing all that information. And your brain overnight starts to put that in long-term memory. So not only will you probably do better on that test on Friday, but here's the real thing. You're going to do way better on cumulative tests that count for a big grade. And that's how you get better grades, is practicing over time and practicing by self-testing. So again, you want to do it in short bursts. Take the kid that says, they're willing to put in the time. They put in an hour on Thursday. Here's what I would say. What if you took that hour and you did 20 minutes Tuesday, 20 minutes Wednesday, 20 minutes Thursday? You're ultimately going to get a better result. So study skills aside, here's what I would recommend. If your child is really struggling to understand a specific content area, say math, because that's really very common, you want to get your child help. You don't want to wait until the end of the year when they've gotten a bad grade across the year and just hope that they're going to pay attention more or put in more effort. When you're down and out and you don't understand something, it's incredibly hard to correct it by yourself. You need help. So when we work with students, we assess the student. All right, where is it? What are the foundational skills that are hard for you? Let us fill in the gaps. But we don't want it to always be remedial, because the student still has to do well in school. So we always help with homework. And then if time, we'll preview the material towards the end of the session that they're going to see the next day. And this is really helpful, because then the student goes back to school and they have a sense of what they're going to see. So they're more knowledgeable. They're better able to pay attention. And that Swiss cheese thing isn't as prominent. And lastly, of course, we want to make sure kids know how to study. So, this can be with a professional, which is what we do. It can be having regular appointments with the teacher. It could be a college student down the street. But what I will say is, if your child is really struggling, just make sure you reach out and get some type of help. The other thing I haven't mentioned, but I do think it's worth mentioning, is that up to 30% of students report that they feel some degree of test-taking anxiety on the day of the test, which impacts their performance. So what do you do about that? Here's what we don't want to do. We don't want to say to our kids, don't worry, it will be fine. That's not helpful. Instead, we want to say, tell me about that. How are you feeling? What are ways that you think you might be able to practice for that test differently? So what we've found, and I've been doing this for a long time, when kids practice in the format they're going to take the test, it's not like it's novel and new and scary on test day. They've already had experiences with it. So if the test is going to be essay response, they practice responding to essays. If it's short answer, they practice that way. If it's multiple choice, Maybe they go to the unit test at the end of that chapter and practice the multiple choice. So they want to study in the format of the test. A study out of University of Chicago found that when students walk into a test on test day and they're feeling super anxious, like heart's beating, palms are sweaty, really nervous, if they just take a minute on a piece of paper, could be in their notebook, wherever, and they jot down their thoughts, like what they're worried about, that in itself helps to calm the amygdala, which is the emotional center of your brain. And when you're calmer, your executive function skills can work a lot better. And that's what you want. When you're calm, you're going to be able to do a better job and get a better grade. So writing down your worries can help. So we've talked already about things that to look for if your child is having subject area issues where they don't understand the content. But here's the other thing that can really, really impact kids, and it's issues with weak executive function skills. So what are executive function skills? You probably know all about these. They're actually kind of complicated. This is a model by Tom Brown. He's out of Yale University, and he's really, really well known in the field. And he says, there's lots of things that go into executive function skills. They're cognitive processes in the frontal lobe of the brain. But really, an easy way to think about executive function skills are your brain's ability to organize your thoughts and then transfer those thoughts into actions. So you have a sense of what you're going to do, and then you're able to focus well enough to execute on those thoughts. Those are executive functions. So we're basically, executive functions help guide us to a goal. When we work with students, we think it's important for kids to learn systems. Hacks don't work. So you may have read articles like the number one hack to fix executive function skills doesn't work. You may have seen brain training activities like apps and things that supposedly fix executive function skills. They don't work either. What the research says, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is that you have to have a system around these things. You have to be able to have a process. Okay, when I come home after school, this is what I do. That process helps kids a lot. So when we work with kids, one of the first things we do is we have them open up their learning management software. So this is their portal with their homework. Schoology, it could be Canvas, depending on where their student is located. But we want them to show us, okay, let's look at English, let's look at history, let's look at Spanish. What do you have in each class? So what do you have that's due right away? And then what do you have long term? And we have kids write this information down, what they have to do in their calendar, so they understand what they have coming up. Then for that day, we help them to triage their assignments. What do you want to get done first, second, maybe third? And we'll help them to complete the hardest task. And by the way, if your child struggles with procrastination, research shows that you don't want to start with the easiest thing if that hasn't worked for you in the past. You want to start with the hardest thing and get that out of the way. So for that reason, when we see, all right, you've got these 3 things to do tonight, what feels heaviest to you? What's the hardest for you? What do you think you're going to procrastinate on the most? And that's where we help kids. We want to make sure that we're helping them with the hard things. And then at the end of the session, we'll ask them, okay, now you kind of have a plan for what to do this week. What could get in your way? And we want to help them anticipate obstacles, because if they have a plan for I've been watching this series on Netflix and I can't stop binge watching. Okay, I get it. If you're in that mode and you really want to not watch Netflix, but you have on Tuesday, you need to study for the science test. What are you going to do if your brain says Netflix, but you really should be doing, studying? And so we want to come up with solutions for kids so they're preemptive. When they get to that situation, they know what to do. So that's a system for kids building executive functions on a daily basis, typically. But here's the other thing. They also need a system for what to do later on. Because for some kids, they can kind of do okay and turn things in, but it's everything that's due later on that's hard for them. So these are often multi-step projects with future due dates. And many times kids have gotten in the habit of doing things at the last minute, but this doesn't work for really big projects like a science fair project, maybe a book report for a younger student, a research paper. So that's where backwards planning comes in. And we work with kids to determine, okay, what is it that you have? And when are you going to start this? Let's figure out what are the tasks that need to be done to complete this big thing. Let's break these things down. And let's figure out when you can do these and put them in the calendar. And then we also include some buffer time because chances are it's not going to go perfectly. And there may be times when you don't finish that task and you need some buffer time. And then we'll check in with the student. How is that going for you? How did that work? How are you feeling about this? That's a skill called metacognition, which is really important so kids can self-correct. Now, as a parent, here's what you can do. You can say to kids, okay, do you have anything big coming up, i.e. a test, a project, that type of thing? Tell me about that. What is it that you have to do? And when do you think you might start on that? What's the first thing you might do to get going on that project? Those are good questions to get kids thinking about a process. So those are things we can do on a regular basis and then for long-term things. But let's say your child comes home with a low grade, or you log into the portal, or you hear from the teacher that it is not going so well. What do you do in the moment when you're upset and you see a bad grade? It used to be, when we were kids, we came home with a physical report card. But now bad grades can happen all the time because everything is pretty much in real time. Sometimes it's our MO, our method of operation as a parent to say, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you have a D in math. Why do you have all these overdue assignments? This is ridiculous. But we do not want to do that. We want to hold back on those thoughts. We want to give it some distance and talk to our child when we're calm. If we're anxious, our kids are anxious. If we're upset, our kids are going to be upset. And nothing good happens in a conversation when everybody's upset. Nothing. So give it distance. You might say to your child, hey, can we talk after dinner tonight? And our goal as a parent is to create an open discussion for kids. It's also our goal as a coach or a tutor to have these conversations all the time, because often when asked the right questions, kids can come up with a lot of good solutions on their own. How do we get to that? Well, here are I want to share with you a couple of ideas. One, again, we don't want to say, seriously, Jimmy, a D in science? And he says, Mom, stop being so ridiculous. Everybody got a low grade. I have the worst teacher. And mom says, no, you don't. That's not true. The more you push, the more your child pushes back. We don't want to get to that point. So instead of that scenario, of that confrontation, we want to have a conversation. How do we do that? We start with something like, I've noticed science is hard this quarter. Tell me about it. Because you want your child to talk to you and you don't want to pass judgment, all you want to do is be a good listener. And actually, you don't even have to fix anything in the moment. You just want to have an open dialogue. If your child is really resistant to talking to you, you might say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you feeling about science? Like 1 would be really bad and 5 would be amazing, kind of like a Google review. And sometimes when kids can't come up with the feelings around, I've noticed this is hard, what do you think? They can attach a feeling to a number and they can say, I feel like a 2. And then you say, oh, a 2, I totally get it. Why did you give yourself a 2? Well, tell me what's happening. Out of out of really interest in hearing about what's been going on. And I actually created some really good downloads for you. You can get these on our website, which is ectutoring.com/webinar-resources. And one is how to talk to kids about bad grades. And then the other one is powerful questions. And these are questions that reframe the confrontation into more of a conversation. And these really help kids become more independent and productive. So please visit our website and you can find these and download them and save them. They'll come straight to your inbox. All right, so I want to shift gears for just a moment, if you don't mind, and go to commonly asked questions. Because parents, I've been doing this for a long time, they often have similar questions about their kids when it comes to grades. So let's start with the first one. Should I punish? Should I take away my child's phone for bad grades? Should I say you can absolutely have no video games? Or should I say you can't even go out on the weekend? Or should I take the opposite approach, because I heard that this is good, and just reward my child? Like, oh my gosh, you got a good grade. Let me take you shopping. Or let's go for an ice cream. Or, hey, that's awesome. You know, a pat on the back. What should I do? Well, in general, praise is the best. You know, there's been lots of research that shows punishment doesn't work when it comes to correcting something like a low performing student in a grade. And neither does things like big rewards. You know, I had a parent once say, I told my daughter I was going to take her to Disney World if she got straight A's. And she was super motivated at first, but then her motivation waned. And here's why. It's too far away, and getting good grades is really big. It's very, very hard and complicated. So in general, praise when you see your child doing a good job is best. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't notice things that are short-term versus long-term. For example, short-term rewards in the form of privileges can work for certain things. But they do not work for complex things like getting straight A's or getting good grades. By the way, that's too vague because the task is too long-term and complex. So here's an example. Little things, you know, you might say, actually, let me get to natural consequences in a second. I just had this thought. They work for little things like, you know, hey, if you come downstairs for school by 8 o'clock dressed and your teeth are brushed, you can watch TV for a half hour before the bus comes. That would be like a little privilege. And so that works because it's a small thing that kids can do kind of easily, right? So that's when, you know, maybe something that they want to do, like a video game or TV, could work. The other thing that can work is natural consequences. So natural consequences are you want your child to come down before school with teeth brushed, and you've reminded them a bunch of times and they still don't do it. What do? You can let those little things go. Like the child then says, oh, so-and-so said I have bad breath. Huh. Okay. I wonder if brushing your teeth in the morning could help with that. What do you think? Or don't say anything at all. Maybe the student turned in the science project late, and it's you know, what we really want to do is just ride them and taskmaster it and micromanage until they get it done. But you don't, they turn it in late. They have to deal with the lower grade. They don't pack their violin for strings class. You could drive to school and bring it to them, but a better thing is to allow them to have the natural consequence of showing up without their violin. So those natural consequences tend to work well for little things, but we don't want to use them for really big things all the time. Like your child won't even get on the bus and we say, oh well, you know, let the natural consequence of the school getting in trouble at school occur. Because when we know when our child doesn't go to school, that's a bad thing and it can morph into an even worse problem. The child failing algebra class, you know, you get the bad grade, let's see what happens. We want to intervene before these big things, right? So that's why getting help earlier on before the big thing occurs is important. Another commonly asked question, and this is the one I get the most. What do I do if my child lacks motivation? Right? Because a lot of times bad grades are related to a motivation issue. Here's the thing. In order to have intrinsic motivation, this is that you're motivated because you want to do it, not because somebody told you to. Three things have to be present, and this is based on the self-determination theory, which is my favorite theory about motivation for kids. Number one, autonomy, that you can do this without micromanagement. You have a choice. So for example, it's not really that you know, whether you do your homework or not, but do you want to start your homework at 3 or after dinner? You have the autonomy to make choices. Competence. Do you have the abilities to do the work? Kind of going back to that first group of kids I talked about that have the subject struggles. If you don't understand the content, you don't feel you have the competence. And this can cause an issue with motivation. And then the last one is the purpose of it. Is this meaningful to the student? Do they see a reason why they have to know this information? Sometimes kids don't get the purpose behind things. Like, why do I have to know the Pythagorean theorem? But they have enough goal-directed behavior to say, you know what, this is dumb. I'm probably never going to use this in real life, but I want to get a decent grade in this class because it helps my overall GPA. And maybe that will help me get into a college later on. So really it is these three things that need to be present with motivation. So what can we do? Well, how do you instill motivation in your home? Number one, keep talking to your child. Keep the dialogue open and make it positive as much as possible. Not passing judgment, not telling them, you know, you're upset about their grades, not asking did you questions. Did you do this? Did you do that? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Those things don't work. Keep it positive. And the other thing you can do to keep yourself in check, I know I had to do this as a parent too, because of course we all want our kids to do their best. Establish nag-free zones. So this might be, and this is really an important one, if you have a family dinner, and as much as possible, have time where you eat and break bread with your child. Studies have shown that eating together actually has a significant impact on GPA, on grades. During this time, make it a time where you do not talk about school. You do not talk about grades, definitely grades, so that there's no friction, you know, about how kids are doing in school. This is just a time to talk about other things. It might be in the car, you know, you never talk about grades. That would be another nag-free zone so that you don't feel compelled to ask, how are you doing in this or that? And then the other thing I'll say is, as much as possible, we want to support our kids' interests. I once worked with a student. She was a middle schooler at the time, and her mom called me. This was many years ago, but she really sticks out in my mind still to this day. And her mom said she has no motivation at all, like absolutely no motivation at all. Her grades are terrible. I don't know what to do. I'm so upset. I'm so frustrated. I meet with the student and she is struggling in school. There's no doubt about this, but she does have motivation. It's just not for the academics. Actually, she did have motivation in one class, and that was an elective art class she was taking. Everything else, not so much. What I found about this girl is that she was unbelievably a gifted artist. And her mom was so upset that she took away her art supplies so that she could focus more on her grades and not the things she wanted to do. It was really, really a power play. And that made the conflict at home even worse. So I mentioned this because I said to mom, what if you gave her back her art supplies? And what if you enrolled her? There was an art studio down the street that had classes for kids. What if you enrolled her in a class that she wants to take and let her shine? And she did that. And things started to get a little bit better because this was something the student felt really good about. It was the time in her part of her life that made her feel like a whole person. And many of our kids are like this. They might be great on the soccer field, not so good in the classroom. And it can be, we want to take those things away from them, but that's not what we want to do. Always support your kids' interest because it is that thing that they're good at that can help them muster the strength to get through other trying times. With this girl, we kept in touch, and later on, she ended up going to an art school in Georgia, and she became that was her major, was I can't remember what it was, or the exact major, but it was some kind of art major. And that's what got her through school, because she started to see, okay, grades do matter if I want to go to this college. And so oftentimes that can get our kids through hard times. In fact, Kathy Gold and I, she and I work together. We just did this really great motivation webinar the other day, and we've already uploaded it. And if motivation is your child's issue, feel free to watch it. And I put it on that same page with all the webinar resources. It's about an hour long. It's 45 minutes of us talking and about 15 minutes of Q&A. And that's at ectutoring.com/webinar-resources. All right, just a couple of other questions. How do I talk to my child's teacher about good grades? I mentioned those words I've noticed, and I like them a lot. They work for kids, they work for spouses, they work in the workplace, and they work with teachers. Like, I've noticed Jimmy is really struggling in math. What are you seeing on your end? And again, eliciting feedback and having a conversation. You can also say, what can I do on my end? So it's more of a collaborative effort. But at the end of the day, we want teachers to be on our side to help solve the issues. And we really want to be proactive in seeing when our kids do need help, because it may not get better. It can continue to go down, and we want to intervene. And of course, we always want to notice our kids' strengths, because that's what will get them through hard times. As we wrap up and go to Q&A in just a second, and by the way, I know that questions are not in the chat, but in Q&A. So I see a bunch of things in the chat. So I'll get there too, I promise. But either way you want to put them, we'll make sure you get them. We're going to go to questions in just a second. But we're here to help you. I have a team of educators that work with me, Kathy, Jennifer, and Ann Stewart, and they talk to parents all day long about their kids. And we're happy to talk to you about your child, to see if what we do in terms of tutoring or executive function coaching is a match for what your child needs. And if it's not, we will absolutely point you into the right direction. And if you scan that QR code, that will bring you to the calendar to schedule a call. Or you can just go to our website and you'll also see the calendar there. And then lastly, before we get to questions, if your child is thinking about college, I want to mention we're having an upcoming webinar on March 4th at 7 o'clock. And it's all about the digital ACT and how that compares to the digital SAT, how that compares to the ACT, and whether even kids need to take a test in this test optional environment. And again, you can get to that on the page that I mentioned, ectutoring.com/webinar-series. Okay, so let's go to questions. Mary Beth, is it okay if I just go to the chat and the Q&A and read some of these questions out?
Yeah, so let me, I don't think we have any, the chat isn't open for our participants, but
Oh,
the
okay.
Q&A is.
Got it.
Melissa has been putting wonderful resources, and I will direct everybody to take a look at the chat. So Melissa's put links there and information about how to register for the SAT ACT webinar that you talked about. So I would direct people to take a look at that as well. But I'm going to start with our first question. So this parent is asking about what is the best way to teach study skills. My child's elementary school does not give homework, it does not send home study guides or review information related to content. So, how do I help him develop study skills?
Marissa, that's a really great question because we've seen this shift from kids getting a lot of homework, then not so much, in some schools, very little at all, and sometimes none. If your child doesn't have homework, that's okay. They probably still have some type of assessment. It might be a spelling test. It could be a quiz. So that's where you can help them study. So for example, with the spelling test, I would make sure it's in the format of the test. So don't just have your child read through the words, ask your child, okay, number one, because, and have them write it out. So you can teach in the format of the test for sure. Other things you can do are practice with the students. So if your child is working on multiplication facts, you may not need to teach study skills, but you can still practice those things at home. There's tons of games. I have a student that I work with. He's a third grader, and his teacher said he's really struggling with math facts. And so I bought a math war game on Amazon. It was like $4. You can do fun things like that. There's also these really fun beach balls that you can buy that have math facts on them, and you make it a game. You throw it to your child, they catch it. Wherever their thumb lands, they say that fact and say it out loud, like 6 times 6 is 36. So you're not necessarily working on study skills, but you're practicing content. And for some of our kids that are kind of weak in content areas, I would recommend doing that, but making it fun. You don't have to do it 5 minutes, really 10 minutes, but making it fun so that they're feeling connected to what they're doing.
All right. So, next question. How important are grades in middle school? I keep hearing that they're not included in a student's record in FCPS. How would you recommend handling bad grades in one subject only where the student has excelled previously but is struggling in middle school?
Well, grades do matter in middle school. Number one, if it's a credit class, like an algebra class, for example, algebra one, that is, and many kids do take that in 8th grade, that is on the student's high school transcript, or Spanish one, for example. So those grades really do matter. The other thing I would say about grades in middle school is, to me, they matter because middle school is a proving ground for high school. High school is a proving ground for college. So when you're seeing that there's a low grade in a core subject, I'm not as concerned about health, PE, or maybe an art class. But I am concerned if there's a lower than anticipated grade at a core subject, especially math or English. And so if you see that, that's where I would take action, because you're learning really important skills, baseline skills, that if you don't have those in middle school, 9th grade is going to be pretty hard for you. And so for those reasons, whether it's on the transcript or not, you want to make sure your child has a strong foundation in middle school.
No, absolutely. This mom is asking around the fact that um, her child will probably study for 5 or 10 minutes, then she wants to go watch something. And I'm not sure if that's just TV or YouTube, um, which is not, of course, giving her a lot of time to study. Um, how would she encourage her a little bit more? Maybe with timelines or schedule, what might that look like, Anne?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple ideas I have.
Hmm.
Part of it might depend on the age of the student. So if your
Right.
child's really young, say like a 4th grader, that might actually be enough time if they're doing really well in school. So if they're doing really well in school, I probably wouldn't worry about it. But if they're struggling in school and that 5 or 10 minutes isn't paying off to the grade, and you're seeing a connection, ask some questions. Say, I noticed that you put about 5 or 10 minutes into this. Um, do you think that's enough time to get you where you want to be? And hear what she says. If she says yes, say, tell me about it. How did that test go for you? Do you feel like you've done everything that you absolutely need to do to be prepared? And so you're kind of trying to have that dialogue with kids. So I would start there with a student that isn't interested in putting in too much time. You sometimes they have really weak attention span and that's all they can tolerate. So you might say, oh, I noticed 10 minutes is about it. I totally get it. Would you consider also putting in 10 minutes another day? I've heard that that can help you remember something in the future too. And you might say this could work for you, it might not. So then your child is kind of having an out in a way, but at least you're putting the seed in their mind that this idea, this spaced practice, which we talked about, can be helpful. And it doesn't really require that much more effort on the side of kids.
Oh, great. So our next question, how do you address the big things when the child does not seem to care about grades?
Yeah, we were talking about this in the motivation webinar because a
Yeah.
couple of parents said the same thing. I've had a number of experiences around this. One, I will say that kids do care, but they try to save face. They don't want to look like they don't care, because it's easier to do poorly on something if you didn't try, right? So sometimes it looks like kids don't really want to do the work and they don't care, but they really do. If you see that this is pervasive, it's not just in a couple subjects, but it's across the board and it's been chronic. Like you've seen this not just in one quarter, but over time. That's when I'd absolutely reach out for help. There could be something else there. It could be academic for sure, but there could be other things happening like depression. If you see that your child is staying in their room a lot, it's not just academics, but it's across the board, doesn't want to really hang out with friends, doesn't want to do anything else outside the home, that's when I would think, you know what, there could be something else going on more in the mental health realm. Let me talk to my pediatrician and seek out other things, because this doesn't feel quite right. So I would go in that direction.
No, thank you. This parent is asking about how do we help children develop interest in just reading and reading a
Yeah.
book, and how might that help?
Yeah, I mean, reading, oh my gosh, it used to be that kids would just kind of like pick up a book and read independently. It's not really like that anymore. So here's a couple things you can do. There's actually lots of research on reluctant readers. And this information has been out for a long time, but then I just saw, this was a couple months ago, I saw a more recent study on this. That kids that are really reluctant readers, if they listen to something, like maybe they're listening to the book online and they're following along in the book, that actually improves their fluency and their comprehension more than reading alone. Here's why, because they're hearing a good reader read the book, and the good reader usually reads with inflection, which makes it more interesting. So I would say, if you can get that book in audible form, allow your child to listen to it. Ideally, they're following along in the book, but even if they're not, it's okay. They're still getting the joy of reading. Try to frame reading around relaxation, like at night to calm down, to get to bed. The other thing you can do is if you want to be involved as a parent is do not say, go up in your room and read a book. It's not going to happen. You're going to walk upstairs and your son's playing with Legos or your daughter's, online. Instead, say, hey, how about this? I'll read a page, you read a page, and always, always pick out an easy book, even a book that they've read. It's okay. Could be a graphic novel. It's okay. Or for a super reluctant reader, I'll read 2 pages, you read 1 page. That's perfectly fine. And now you've got your child engaged. Don't correct them. So if they drop word endings, which is super common with kids with ADHD, if they leave out words, do not correct them. Let it go. If they have the general sense of what's happening, it's okay. It's only if they miss a major word that completely affects comprehension of the entire thing, then I would say, oh, it's actually this word, not that word. But in general, when we correct our kids, it puts them on the defensive, and we just want reading to be pleasurable.
Thank you. So this parent has a son, 15, who's diagnosed with ADHD. and it feels like he only just wants to relax and play video games. He's very social, but not involved in clubs or activities and doesn't not want to play sports. How do I encourage his strengths and involvement without making decisions for him?
Yeah, it's hard when you have a 15-year-old because he's probably, I would say, is probably a ninth grader, maybe 10th grade. And you're right, Leslie, to like really kind of step back and allow him to be part of this. It's so common, we see this all the time where, kids, this for our relaxation. I know when I came home from school, I turned on soap operas, and that's how I wound down in high school. But for kids now, it's like video games, and they have this whole social environment with they play with a lot of the same kids. They meet kids online. So that's kind of like their outlet. And so it makes me feel better when you said he's very social. And he probably has friends outside of this. So it might be okay. I try to talk to him about his video games. I would say, "Oh, I notice you're playing this game a lot. Tell me about it." You might say, "Oh, I'm just curious about this game. I can tell you really like it a lot. Can I watch you play it?" And then see what's all about. Ask him questions about it. Ask him how he got to that level, his favorite characters in the game. Have a discussion around it. We were talking about this exact same thing yesterday or the other day in the motivation webinar, and my co-host Kathy said her son, who also has ADHD, she had the same thing, and she was like really worried about him. He was a really good kid, like not fabulous grades, but decent, and he was really obsessed with video games. And she took that role and asking him a lot about it. And he would say, I don't, this game, it stinks because they have it like this and you can't get to the next level and unless you do this. And she'd say, well, if you designed it, how would you do it? And so it became this running dialogue. Fast forward, he's now a software developer, and maybe that had a role in it, maybe it didn't. But keeping conversation going and making sure that it's not the only thing in your child's life, which it sounds like it's not, is definitely a good sign.
All right. So my freshman has a habit of turning assignments in late. How do I get him to get things in on time?
Yeah, this is a
Major
big
question.
one. Yeah.
All
you know,
right.
it's everybody has this question because it's so common and yet it's so tricky. Because there's a lot of research that shows procrastination leads to more anxiety and it leads to lower grades. And that makes sense because you've got this thing hanging over you and then you do it at the last minute. And when we do stuff at the last minute, it's usually not our best work, right? And so we think as parents, like, oh my gosh, the natural consequence, don't do it at the last minute, right? But for a lot of kids, they don't see the pain in it. There's two types of procrastinators. There's functional procrastinators and there's dysfunctional procrastinators. And the dysfunctional ones are the ones that wait till the absolute last minute and they can't get it done. And now everybody knows, like they know because they haven't turned it in. They're upset. Their teacher knows, right? Sometimes it's caused a lot of stress in the home and but then, so there's like a lot of bad things that happen from that. But the functional procrastinators, and that's more of these kids, they kind of get by with it. They wait till the last minute. Nobody really knows because they still turn it in on time for the most part. And they can kind of keep it under wraps. But sometimes, they will turn in some assignments late. They may not have a severe pain point because they don't feel like it's impacting them that much. It usually doesn't become an issue until kids are a little bit older and they can get away with that stuff in ninth grade when they're not taking very challenging classes, but they cannot get away with it when they're older. And so I would just have dialogue with your child. You're not going to make them feel the pain if it's not there. And it's really hard to make a ninth or 10th grader, especially a ninth grader, do something about it. So I would ask the questions, what's the first step in starting this? When might you think you could start so you're not feeling as stressed if that's how they're feeling? And really asking questions about starting around it. Would this be a good time to start on this? And so, as much as we can kind of help kids fire up their executive function skills to help thinking ahead, that's really the best thing we can do. The other thing you can do is have a professional help your son. If you see that actually this is leading to lower grades and you are concerned that this behavior can escalate. We have a lot of kids like this, and parents call and they'll say, "This is my kid's biggest issue." We have this little assessment that we do with kids on executive function skills. And what we often find is that the skill the parent wants us to work on, like dealing with procrastination, is not high on the kid's list. Their issue might be, I just want to get a good grade in this class, for example. I'm more worried about this than that. And so we enter with this skill over here. And then later on, after we've built trust, it's a good relationship, we're making progress, then we'll go back to the procrastination issue. But if we go in with guns blazing, like your mom said, you need to work on this is what we're going to do, it doesn't really work with kids. And same thing with parents, they may not be open to it. So that's why we just have to ask questions and maybe help in another way where they're allowing us to give help.
All right, thank you, Anne. So we have a mom who's really asking about her son who is currently in ESOL classes. He's a 10th grader, and of course his English is not good. It's weak, he said. Would you have any tips for her on how she might be able to support his English learning at home?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of things you can do, as much obviously, and I know you know this, as much as possible, speak English at home, even if you set a timer and you just set it for 5 minutes. And that is one way to do it. Also, kids can use an app like Duolingo, and they can practice a little bit at home doing that. But what I probably wouldn't do is go back to the super very beginning, because it's kind of like when the student is struggling in ninth grade math, and then we realize, wow, actually, they don't have full command of basic quick addition, subtraction, and multiplication. We wouldn't want to spend a lot of time on addition and subtraction because that might feel demeaning to an older student. So for those reasons, I probably wouldn't start, if you want to practice with him, going back to something that's too easy or too basic. It might be a little bit insulting, but maybe backing up a couple of levels. Talk to the teacher. Say, I've noticed that my son is still struggling with this. Do you have ideas that we could do together that will be appropriate for him? And ask the teacher if she can send home something. So I would try those little things and just do them a little bit every day. We don't want to ask too much from our kids. If they're feeling bad about something, we want to just do the time that they're going to be willing to work with us. And it might just be 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes.
No, Anne, thank you. And there were a couple other questions that I actually addressed because they were very FTPS specific, but I thought I would throw it out there to everyone just so everyone had noticed the answers. And that was just really around, do schools provide support like for study skills or executive functioning? And so I said certainly to reach out to students, teachers, students, counselors. There is a course at the high school level called Strategies for Success. That may be an opportunity for a student. That may be a good match for a student. So I did want to just to remind our families that please start at your child's school. That's a really great place to begin, and talk with your child's teacher or talk with your child's school counselor. And again, also reach out to us here at the Family Resource Center. We're really happy to work through some of that with you all as well. All right. Well, seeing no other questions, Anne, thank you so much. This has been terrific. If you all have any questions, you can reach out to us. I'm as well as to Anne and her organization. And we're going to pass along Anne's slides to you as well as the recording. So you'll have those reference points. And we hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. And Anne, thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Great to see you today. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.